We want to be able to address them across different disciplines. So thank you for joining us here to engage and to share in your perspectives about these important topics. And again, I want to thank the entire team with Politifest, the Voice of San Diego, USD's Political Science Department and International Relations, and also a college faculty member who teaches occasionally, who has also been a strong supporter, and she's a member of my college board of advisors. You may know her, Mary McKenzie, so I just want to thank her as well for her contribution. So there you go.
Thank you, Dean Norton. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dean Norton. Thank you so much. This year, we've had a sponsor from them for a while, a partnership with them for a while. But this year, it took another level. Well, we were some of the pioneers in the nonprofit news industry. We weren't the first online news organization. We weren't the first nonprofit news organization. But we were the first to combine those for a local area. And now there are about 330 or so nonprofit news organizations across the country, all of whom took our lead on that, and we're super proud of that accomplishment. Thank you. Some of them have taken steps and grown well past what we've been able to achieve, and now they've taught us a thing or two. And one of those organizations that's leading and creating something special for the whole state of California in that same model is Cal Matters. And I'm pleased to welcome the CEO of Cal Matters, Neil Chase.
Scott, thank you. I was going to start off not by talking about Cal Matters, but by sharing what you just said about this organization, Voice of San Diego. You know it as your local news organization. What you may not understand is a little bit of what Scott just said. Around the country, around this whole industry, Voice of San Diego is where it all started, right? And not only that, but because Voice of San Diego was one of the very first organizations to do this kind of journalism, they actually had to spin out another group, an industry trade group that now has like 500 members that helps everybody else figure out how to do that. That grew out of this organization too. And a lot of what we've done at Cal Matters, we've learned from Voice of San Diego. So we're grateful to you and to the folks who started this organization and the good partnership. Cal Matters is an 8-year-old organization, so just a child compared to Voice. We're based in Sacramento. We have people all over the state. And we were formed 8 years ago to fill the gap in coverage about the state government, right? We in California, we're so passionate about the place we're from. When somebody asks you where you're from, you probably don't say California, you probably say San Diego, right? We talk about our baseball teams. We talk about all of us stealing water from each other, which is a great topic today of conversation, right? But there is a unification, financially at least, and legally, of this giant state of California, bigger than most countries, that a lot of folks don't think about the connection between all these different issues. And so Cal Matters covers state government. We work very closely with Voice and a lot of other organizations to make sure that coverage gets to people who will find it useful. This idea of nonprofit journalism, years ago, the advertising business paid for journalism. That's not true anymore. That's why we so much have to rely on you to support Voice, to support Cal Matters, to support most of the news organizations that you're going to see growing and thriving in the coming decades. And so you being here today is really important to Voice of San Diego, really important to us at Cal Matters. It's a wonderful partnership, and we're thrilled to do it with you.
Thanks, Neil. He didn't mention it, but one thing we're working on together is, does anybody remember the Sacramento report? Yeah, it's been a couple years now since the Sacramento report ran. We are bringing it back in partnership with Cal Matters. Lopez, our managing editor, is on the team helping hire that position for Cal Matters, and it's going to be a really special, I think, addition and just a great example about how joining forces we can get something special done. So thank you, Neil. Appreciate it. So I was convinced I had one job for this event, and that was to get somebody to come sing the national anthem. And I kept putting it at the bottom of my to-do list and never got to it. I even got to the point yesterday where I posted on Twitter, does anybody know how to sing? And one guy's like, well, my Aunt Beth does. Yeah, okay, thank you. So we're not going to do it, but I'm going to do a little pitch for the spirit of it. So I had somebody tell me the other day, this is odd that you call it politics. I have friends that say, oh, your little festival of politics, huh? And they're like, it's odd that you call this politics, because it's like policy and it's water, and these aren't things that some people associate with politics, right? They think, I think a lot of people unfortunately have an image in their mind of politics as two people on Fox News or MSNBC debating something horrific like policies on the border, or just cruel solutions that they should be yes or no on, or just really debased understanding of the issue at hand. And I think what politics really means is that it's a system, some sort of effort where we try to solve this problem of how we share power, how we work together without violence, right? If let's talk about, for instance, the next panel after the first one in this room is the Colorado River. How do we share the Colorado River? Well, without politics, without the rule of law that underlies everything that allows us to have politics, we would solve how to share the Colorado River through a violent means, right? We would see who has the biggest guns, and we would make that happen. Politics allows us to share power, to share interests, and to make things peaceful, and to compromise and come to a solution based on the popular will of the people. Politics is special. Politics is beautiful. I think a lot of people say, he's just playing politics, as though it's an insult. Everything is political because everything, at least we hope, is being settled through peaceful compromise and the sharing of power, and that's what politics is. And so the next time you hear somebody say like, he's just a politician, or she's just trying to play politics, or they're just involved in a political game, everything should be a political game, because the alternative is horrific. And we see it play out in many other countries where it's actually the point of the gun that makes these decisions, as opposed to the ballot box, as opposed to angry fights at city council, as opposed to some of these difficult decisions and compromises that we have to make. And that's what today is meant to celebrate. Everything is politics, and that's okay. And we should celebrate it. And I just think like that's the spirit of what this country helped innovate, and that's the spirit of the national anthem. And everybody, let's celebrate politics, huh? So, in case you're not familiar with Voice of San Diego, anybody not? This is our core group, I think. We are a nonprofit news organization dedicated to holding public officials accountable. The information, and to provide information you need to make good decisions for social progress and good governance. We are dependent. Last year, more than 70% of our funds to make this possible, to pay all our reporters, to do everything like this, was made possible by individuals who supported Voice of San Diego. More than 70%, that's an achievement I'm really proud of. We didn't get any national funding, no major grants like that. It's all just individuals. Now, there's a bunch of local foundations and supporters that make it possible still, but all of you who support Voice of San Diego, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And just a shout out to our sponsors this year. Thanks to the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of San Diego and Dean Norton. It really is special what you've done for us and for the community. Our thanks as well to AARP. It's their second year getting support for them for this wonderful event. Thank you, AARP. Burnham Center for Community Advancement, the San Diego County Water Authority, the San Diego Foundation. By the way, the Water Authority supporting Voice San Diego is wonderful. Thank you so much. Not something I ever pictured. The Atlantis Group, California American Water, Cox Communications, San Diego Housing Federation, Burnham Moore Center for Real Estate at USD's NOS Center for School for Business, Planned Parenthood, Hitsky Development, Climate Action Campaign, Novo Brewing, and our partner, KPBS. Thank you so much. We have a wonderful series of discussions. Yes, thank you. I think one of the biggest complaints I get about Politifest is that there's always more sessions than people can fit in, and they wish that they saw everything. We're going to do our best job yet of repurposing a lot of these insights. There's about 6 student journalists who are taking notes at each place, and I gave them a little quick lesson on acts of journalism, so I'm excited to see that. We will do a lot of content after this, stories about what was said, what happened. So we'll do our best to keep up, so if you miss a panel, you can follow up later. The Colorado River panel, after this first one, has a couple, I think, interesting changes. The Nevada representative of the water effort there couldn't make it because of the fog, but I think there's going to be some great discussions still there, and I'm excited to see what happens. So let's see, I think that's it. Thank you all for attending, and I hope you have a wonderful day. We'll begin this session in now. She said I was supposed to do that, so maybe just...
I'll just introduce you. Or
Could you just...
or do the Q&A thing?
Yeah, do the Q&A. Just note the sponsors again. Do the Yes, come on up. Yeah. I will be in the middle. You guys over here, and then Adele will be next to me. You guys have known each other for a while, right? Yeah.
We all used to argue. Now we just get along.
We just go with the flow.
Right. He's pretty sure.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I always pictured that. Yeah, right.
The Arizona Navy.
Well, just John Ensler is not here. He's the speaker who couldn't make it, so we have to end MD instead.
For this one?
John Scott knows.
Oh, okay. You'll introduce.
Yeah, but we were supposed to. Yes, there is. Sorry.
No worries. Go ahead. If you're ready, you're free.
Ready?
No bottle for me.
Yeah, sorry.
Get a cup. Trust the tap.
I don't know about farmers, they can do that.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. Hi. How's everyone doing? Welcome to Politifest 2023. I'm so glad you guys made it out. My name is Andrea. I'm the managing editor at Voice of San Diego. I'll let a couple of you get settled. Scott pretty much said my piece, but I just like to add additional recognition to our sponsors for today. Thank you to the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of San Diego for being our partner for the 6th year. And special thanks to AARP, Burnham Center for Community Advancement, the San Diego County Water Authority, the San Diego Foundation, Atlantis, California American Water, Cox, the San Diego Housing Federation, Burning Moore Center for Real Estate at USD's Snoss School of Business, Planned Parenthood, Hiskey Development, Climate Action Campaign, Nova Brewing, and our media partner, KPBS. Whew! It's a lot of supporters.
It's good.
That's always good. Thank you, everyone. If you're unable to attend any of our sessions, some of them will be live streamed, and as Scott mentioned earlier, we will be doing our best to repurpose a lot of the content from today onto our website, so you can visit that at vosd.org. And you can submit questions during the panel. I will be flagging those for Scott. If you've downloaded the Cvent app, I'm just going to pause the directions here. You just click on Politifest 2023, find your current panel, and then scroll down to live Q&A. And now I will introduce our fearless leader and CEO and editor-in-chief of Voice of San Diego, Scott Lewis.
Thank you. How about Lopez, huh? I'm a big fan of Lopez. She's brought up. Well, welcome everybody. So I moved to San Diego in 2003 in the spring, and I had just given up jobs. I was following my wife, who was in the Navy. I felt like I was lost with my career, like I didn't know what was going on, and I got a job at the Daily Transcript to cover water and housing. And I thought it was just awful. I thought I had hit the low. I thought how was I ever going to get into exciting things again? I had no idea what a gift I had been given. And it soon occurred to me that I was involved in something special as I started to cover a deal that the San Diego County Water Authority, the Imperial Irrigation District, the Metropolitan Water District, and the Coachella Valley District were putting together what would become the biggest deal in Southern California, in California water history, the Quantification Settlement Agreement. I took the train up to Metropolitan Water District. The train, the station right there opens up to the tower where Met is housed. I went in, I watched them vote on this, and it was special. It was I could tell that it was a special occasion. Since then, it's been now 20 years, and now we're hosting an event about water and housing. And I feel like it's come full circle, and I feel really proud that I've been able to watch things this whole time. What makes that deal so special, in my opinion, is that it truly was a historic transformation. These groups all fought a lot, and then they had to become partners. They still occasionally squabble a little bit, right? Just a little bit. But they were forced to become partners after truly a political effort to figure out a compromise about their various interests and the concern over the Colorado River. I'm going to do an explanation. All of these folks know all of this much better than I do, so I'll ask them to correct it. But the Quantification Settlement Agreement, just put most simply, quantified how much water the California and the Imperial Irrigation District was going to take from the Colorado River. Fair? And that quantification was huge because it meant that for the first time in a long time, California would take its actual allocation from the Colorado River that it had a historical right to from the, quote, law of the river. Fair? I'm doing all right here? Okay. But that had a lot of interesting angles too, and one of the biggest parts of this discussion and this deal was that a lot of the water that Imperial Irrigation District was going to save or conserve would be transferred to the County Water Authority, to San Diego. In effect, a massive transfer of water from the farmers in Imperial Valley to the urban businesses and users in San Diego. Now, they didn't actually transfer the water like in trains across the desert, but they did effectively make that transfer in the world of data and law about the Colorado River. And that was a special one. They also agreed to line the canals, which saved a lot of water, and that excess water was also transferred over. In order to make that transfer possible, they had to make an agreement with the Metropolitan Water District, which does actually transfer the water over, and that was a source of a lot of negotiation and discussion for quite some time, right? 10 years they negotiated. But there were some consequences, and in some cases, some things that we're going to still have to deal with. And I think Michael speaks for one of those interests as the, I guess, the representative on this panel of the Salton Sea. So what year was it when the Salton Sea flooded? 1904 or something? So 1904, they couldn't control the water out of the Colorado River. It all goes into the Salton Sea and creates this lake, which is a very special place for a lot of habitat. It was replenished over time by the runoff from the farms. But as the farms become more efficient, then less water goes into that lake. The salinity of the lake goes up, it dries up, and it creates an environmental catastrophe. Could be an environmental catastrophe. So there's a lot going on here. So first, on my left, at the end, there's Daniel Denham. He's the new general manager of the San Diego County Water Authority. Welcome, Dan. Appreciate
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And then to my immediate left is Tina Shields. She's the water manager at the Imperial Irrigation District. You worked on the Quantification Settlement Agreement, right?
Which was 5.
Yeah, I've worked on it for 20 plus years.
Yeah.
Before it was a quantification settlement agreement.
What was it before? Just like a deal to transfer water?
Well, we started transferring water with Metropolitan in 1989
Mm-hmm.
through our initial conservation program. So that was sort of a harbinger of things to come.
Okay. And then to my right, I'm so excited to have from LA, again, on this stage, just to have everybody here is a really special, kind of historic thing. And to my right is Adel Hagekhalil. He is the new, not new, but sort of new general manager and CEO at the Metropolitan Water District. Welcome, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And then, like I said, Michael Cohen, senior associate at the Pacific Institute, is going to be the kind of voice of the Salton Sea in this, because it truly is a major interest in this entire situation. And if its interests aren't represented, we're going to have a lot of problems throughout the Imperial Valley and throughout California, I think. So welcome, Michael.
Thanks very much for having me as well. And I would, well, I guess I'll elaborate later, but argue that the Salton Sea was critical to the first Metropolitan deal, and then held up the San Diego deal for, 7 years, right? San Diego first proposed in '96. So how to address the Salton Sea, and then we're continuing to grapple with that.
Yeah.
So glad to be here.
Well, Tina, tell me, since you were involved in those discussions and negotiations, what is the biggest, why should we care about the Quantification Settlement Agreement 20 years later? What did it do, and what is it still doing, in your opinion?
So I think we look back and we think about all we've been through to get here, because it's been a little bit of a wild ride, particularly at the beginning. And next Tuesday is actually the 20th anniversary of the execution of all of the agreements. But where we are now, we think, is a really good partnership between ag and urban areas. We supply water that shores up the water supply reliability for much of the state in Southern California, and there's financial supplements to the Imperial Irrigation District, so we can work with our farmers to upgrade our conveyance system and to allow them to implement more expensive conservation measures. So when you talked about the big part of quantification was sort of putting a cap on California, we had been using water that belonged to other states that hadn't fully developed their entitlements, and we were sort of put on notice, hey, California, stop using that extra water. And it had been filling up Metropolitan's pipeline. So perfectly legal uses, but it was time to go on a little bit of a diet. But the other part of the QSA was the settlement part. There was a lot of adverse actions as we tried to facilitate the San Diego transfer, and there were complications with how the water rights system works within California. So there was really a need to not only cap the district's use so you could measure the conservation from, but to settle all these outstanding disputes so that we could move forward in implementation.
So Dan, as we've talked about, the transfer of water from the farmers to the urban area is a key part of this. The title of this discussion we called, Was It a Good Deal? So just this last month, the city of San Diego had to raise water rates, what will be effectively 20% over the next 2 years. The mayor, in explaining to his constituents why that was happening, said it was because of the high cost of imported water, of which this is a contributing factor. In your opinion, was it a good deal that ratepayers in San Diego should be still proud of?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was a good deal. It still is a good deal. I mean, if you think about it, you had willing buyers, willing sellers, right? And I think a real concern for the environment, and I think that's a big piece of it that Michael will hit on. But if you look at the cost of what we pay for the transfer,
a little closer.
If you look at the cost of what we pay for the transfer water right now, you cannot get that water, any new water at that rate at this point in time. We're talking about reuse, desal, things of that nature. So long term, I know early on in the transfer, it was viewed as overpaying in many ways, but I think that's stabilized, and it's gotten to a point where it not only provides certainty for the San Diego region, but certainty for the Imperial Valley in terms of revenue source and funds for conservation.
Adele, let's go to you. So you represented you had to be involved because Imperial Valley gets its water kind of directly from the river. Metropolitan pioneered with the mules and everything way back when to get the pump over the hill and into the greater LA and San Diego area. So you had to be involved in any kind of transfer because those are your pipes, those are your canals. As Met looks at this, does it look like a deal that was something to be proud of?
Yeah, I think the folks that got involved in the QSA should be applauded because I think it's about partnerships. I think Tina mentioned it and many talked about it and Dan talked about it. We were in a place where we had to cut our use by 800,000 acre feet. And Met was a junior water rights holder. And the whole issue is, if you really look at the priority of the river, we would have to take the entire hit. And the urban community, 19 million people that we serve would have suffered from that. And so by us working together and quantifying how much each gets, but building the relationships with our ag partners to conserve water, to help us reduce and live within our share, but then partner to invest in conservation, invest in fallowing, invest in what we need to do to allow us to move water. We cut our water use by 400,000 acre feet. We've done conservation. We invested billions in both local programs for reuse, local programs for conservation. We've done a lot to do that. I mean, our water use today is the same as it was 40 years ago. Our consumption of water is 40% less. Half of it is locally sourced. But I think the start of the QSA was able to bring parties together and figure out how we're going to live within our means, but do it in a collaboration and partnership. We're still doing it right now. I mean, we just did a partnership with Bard Water District. We did a partnership recent with the Quetzal tribe. We did a partnership with the Palo Verde Irrigation District. In the beginning, we did it with IID. What it tells me right now, what we did back then was a great learning. It was successful. And, we had issues, and I know we've learned a lot from it. We continued to work. When I came in, I had to settle a lawsuit with IID and give you some, storage in Lake Mead. But we also learned that we need to store water. And that was a new thing that came right after the QSA in 2007. We had to come up with the intentionally created storage. That was a big change to us, and that helped us because when we have water, we want to store it. When we conserve, we want to store it. So when we have bad days, we can use it. And it has saved us a lot.
Mm-hmm. Well, Michael, help us understand why we should care about the Salton Sea. So talk about what's at stake there, and then what's the impact been over the last 20 years to the sea or to the efforts to save it?
So this is a big question. So I've been working on the Salton Sea for 25 years, and I'm going to try to condense this in the next, 2 minutes.
One and a half, if you could. No,
1 minute. I got a minute. So as I mentioned before, the Salton Sea was the crux of the initial agreement. So in fact, back in 1976, there was a hurricane raising the elevation of the Salton Sea by about a foot, which led to some of Tina's farmers suing the district and leading to a decision by the State Water Board, Decision 1600, saying that there was unreasonable water use in the district. EDF, Tom Graff, put out a report saying here's an opportunity for efficiency-based transfers, which led to the first transfer with Metropolitan back in '89.
Just to clarify, you're saying the Salton Sea had too much water.
So the Salton Sea was rising. So you mentioned the Salton Sea, Colorado River went back to its old terminus, right? The river before we got in there meandered. And the Salton Sea is part of the natural terminus of the Colorado River. In fact, the upper Gulf of California, that's where the Colorado River used to end. River doesn't really flow, doesn't reach the sea anymore, doesn't reach the ocean anymore. But essentially the Grand Canyon, carved out by the Colorado River, filled up the upper trough, the end of the upper Gulf of California, all the way almost up to Coachella. So that's all sediment. So when you're walking on the Salton Sea or the shoreline, that's Grand Canyon sediment that you're walking on. So the river used to meander. We built dams, we built we hardened the channel. The river doesn't meander anymore, but back in 1905, it forced its way back. There was, whatever, an engineering mistake, and the river went back to where it would have gone anyway. So it filled back up, and over time, we've seen multiple iterations. This might take me more than 30 seconds. Multiple iterations of Lake Cahuilla. It used to be called the Salton Sea is what it's there now. But and there's this conception of the Salton Sea as this artificial water body, but there used to be water bodies there periodically over centuries, over millennia. So it filled back up, and then it started to dry up again because they put the river back in this artificial channel. But then IID started irrigating more and more, and the river went through the fields, over the fields, and refilled the Salton Sea. So it was starting to go up, and back in the 50s and 60s, it was a major destination, right? Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack and others were out there. There was water skiing, and a lot of resorts were built out there. And it was a major destination, but then the sea continued to rise because there was more irrigation. They started double cropping, triple cropping in Imperial Valley, became a much more agricultural powerhouse. So the Salton Sea rose and flooded out some of that resort area. It also got saltier. And then there was these hurricanes that came through, and Kathleen in particular in '76, the sea went up almost a foot. And some of the farmers that were farming the very productive land adjacent to the Salton Sea found their lands inundated. So they went through this court process, and then EDF and Tom Graff said, hey, here's an opportunity to solidify water rights for Metropolitan for, how many people were back then, but fewer than now. And Metropolitan started investing in lining canals and increasing the efficiency of water delivery. And then San Diego, late 80s, early 90s, there was yet another California drought, and San Diego got cut what they felt disproportionately and thought we need to secure our own water supply. But the question then was, and people knew that efficiency meant less water flowing to the Salton Sea. And the Salton Sea is a major stopover on the Pacific Flyway. More than 400 different species of birds use the Salton Sea in the environs. It was a major breeding ground. White pelicans, brown pelicans used to breed there. Huge numbers of eared grebes and other shorebirds, ducks, huge numbers of birds, often counting the millions of birds, could be found at the Salton Sea. So it was a huge environmental resource. But the other major challenge is air quality. So air quality in the Coachella Valley and Imperial Valley does not meet state and federal standards. And the recognition back then was, as the Salton Sea shrinks, lake bed's gonna get exposed, and dust is gonna blow off that lake bed. And that's gonna exacerbate an already bad situation. So here's this weird disparity between, I mean, we're looking around this campus or San Diego or certainly not all of Metropolitan's service area, but many portions of it, quite wealthy. But you go down to Imperial Valley or Eastern Coachella Valley, and these are very disadvantaged communities, disproportionately Hispanic. So we're seeing essentially a resource taken away, water being shipped away from a poor area to a rich area to provide water supply reliability. And I would say you guys haven't mentioned that enough, but quick tangent here, sorry. So last year, 7 million people in the Metropolitan Water Service District faced much more severe drought restrictions because they did not have access to Colorado River water. And Metropolitan is working right now to remedy that, to create interties and move that water around to protect that 7 million people. But that water supply reliability was directly felt by those 7 million people who had additional water restrictions. So that, to my mind, is the key point of the QSA is water supply reliability in a region that's increasingly drought. Finishing up here, so the Salton Sea was a sticking point because both ecological resources, but particularly this concern about public health and the shrinking Salton Sea, and it's 50 square miles smaller now than it was 20 years ago when the QSA was signed. That's the size of Chula Vista, right? It's dramatically smaller than it was. Not all of that is emitting dust, but it's emitting a lot of dust, so it's a public health threat there's some 650,000 people in the airshed. So those people are feeling the brunt of this. The downside of the QSA is the ecological threat or the ecological harm that's being felt. The salinity is already double what it was 20 years ago, and directly the threat to public health to the people, particularly the people who live adjacent to the Salton Sea.
Yeah, let's talk to Dan.
Let me just say something
Yeah.
about what Michael said is for the QSA to happen, we had to deal with the Salton Sea. And the state stepped in, right, and helped us. But also, right now, we all, recently with funding was being discussed at the federal level, we all stepped in and wrote letters and supported more investment at the federal level to invest in the Salton Sea, because we all agree that we need to make sure the solution is done in a way that's a holistic approach, right? You can't just benefit one for the harm of another, right? And that's something I believe in, and that's why I wear this pen that we are one. And I talk about providing safe, reliable water for all with no one left behind. And that's a huge thing for us in Metropolitan now. Affordability also is big, because also we have communities in Metropolitan that actually are disadvantaged, as we have in other places in San Diego, in our service area. And we need to make sure is that how we can invest in the future that doesn't bankrupt people and doesn't put them in a place. And we are working through it as part of the climate adaptation work we're doing in Metropolitan to plan for the next 100 years, but also how we pay for the investments in a way that can move us forward.
Yeah. I encourage you all, there was a satellite picture taken yesterday of California. It was so clear. It was one of the clearest satellite pictures ever taken of California. And you can see the Colorado River, and you can see the green of the Imperial Valley and how it flows into the Salton Sea. And you can just see this ancient riverbed in a real stark way if you know what you're looking at with that process. But Dan, I want to ask you, so I think just to put a point on what Michael said, we've conserved water in the Imperial Valley, but a lot of that has been at the cost of the Salton Sea and its replenishment and the ecological and public health problems with that, and people are suffering in some ways because of that. But on the other side, San Diego was protected more than almost any other community in Southern California from some recent concerns about water availability and drought. And there's a direct relationship there. Is that something we should feel bad about, or how should we understand it?
As far as the San Diego and the Salton Sea, that relationship, I think, is kind of what you're getting at. I think that the state of California stepped in at the last minute, 2002, to backstop is the word that we've used a lot of times for the Salton Sea, and provide funding that has been, not as much as was originally anticipated, but I think that there's two parts to this. The QSA, the water transfer, it can't be completely blamed for things that are occurring naturally out in a natural desert community. There is absolutely an impact as a result of the water transfers, but it's not all of it. I mean, the 50 square miles that Michael references, some of that, is not a mist of dust, right? And quite frankly, I think we're all pretty lucky that it's not. And the community out there that would suffer from the 50 or so square miles of emissive playa is in better shape because of some of the funding, I think, that's been provided. So in terms of the San Diego community feeling that we've sort of benefited, absolutely we have. I think there's no way around that. But we continue to work with the Valley, with our partners, and we're looking for solutions.
Can we drive this home? We've talked now twice about the money that the state and others have provided to go in there. What is that literally doing? Maybe Michael, what are they creating wetlands? Tina?
So I could talk a little bit to that, and I don't want to be too Pollyannish because we live there and the other people don't. So we have whiteout dust storms that we didn't used to have, where we can't even see down the block. And I've grown up and lived in the Valley my entire life. We never had that. I don't think it's all transfer related, but certainly our community has to deal with the impacts. And then when coupled with poverty and limited access to health care, really exacerbates a lot of the local issues. But the state of California did step up. That's probably a generous term. IID twice voted the deal down because we had concerns about the Salton Sea, and we didn't want our community to be saddled with that responsibility. So there was legislation passed by the state of California on two parts for the state to be a little proactive and have a restoration responsibility at the sea, but there was also mitigation funding put up by all of the water agencies. And when that funding runs out, the state of California is a signatory to the contract that requires them to fund the supplemental efforts. So the more they do now on a proactive basis for restoration, the less they have to do as a mitigation when you're trying to chase a problem. They've taken a significant amount of funding. Their premier project right now is called the Species Conservation Habitat Project, and it's about a 4,000-acre diked berm area with water from 6 inches to 10 feet deep. They will be reestablishing the fishery, which was lost in the last year or two because the salinity level of the Salton Sea has gotten so high, more than twice of the ocean, and the fish basically can't breed there except where the drain outflows are running into the system. So they'll be populating that. Once you get the fish back, then the birds will start to come because that's their restaurant and that's how they make things go. We also recently, IID has a lot of land ownership down there because of the historical flooding. And we recently executed an amendment on some of those leases so that the state can essentially double the size of that conservation project. And so there will be wetlands totaling over 8,000 acres. There's been a natural occurrence of, as the sea has receded, we've got about 30,000 acres of exposed shoreline now. That's this potential dust concern that we're trying to put dust control projects on. But the state of California is stepping up with that restoration responsibility. They're a little late. They should have started about 15 years ago. There was some mitigation water that was provided so the state could come up with a plan, and they did what people do best, which is kick the can for later on. But when we threatened to turn the water off in a drought a couple of years ago and took the state sort of back to water court with the state board, they did step up and come up not only with funding but a plan. There's a long-term restoration study being conducted now by the Army Corps to figure out how to make the pieces of the puzzle work and ensure a long-term state presence down there.
And the
So-
shift on the relationship that Dan and Tina was talking about, in the beginning of this year, we had a representative from the board in San Diego County Water Authority, the chair of the board, I believe, in IID, and my chair of Metropolitan Water District and representative. We went to D.C. together. The first time you see all of us at the same room talking, advocating for public health, and also taking care of the community there. We actually reached out to the Secretary of the Health and Human Services and others. So you're seeing a huge shift now because I think we want to take care of the community. That's what water is for, is you need to take care of people. And we believe that the Salton Sea and the community there has to be taken care of. And we advocated, all of us together, for that kind of investment from the federal government.
Yeah. Just a shout to everybody who's watching this online. Thank you for joining us. I know there's people throughout Southern California and beyond, so thank you. Michael, before we leave the Salton Sea itself, the topic, obviously we could spend the whole time talking about it, but I still can't quite grasp how you save a lake that's drying up without just giving it more water. How does that literally work? Can it happen that it can survive without an infusion of water?
So this is the classic question which often hangs up conversations about the Salton Sea. And it boils down to, what does restoration mean? We grappled with that back in 2005 to 2007 was the state had this process to look at it and couldn't really decide what restoration meant. We bring it to some previous historic level. But to my mind, it's not bringing the Salton Sea back to some particular elevation. It's restoring the ecosystem function and protecting public health. Those are the two main objectives here. And the upside is that although there's 250,000 acre feet or so less water flowing into the Salton Sea right now, it's still 1 million acre feet. That's a staggering amount of water. That's more than double what San Diego County uses per year. So even if that goes down another 300,000 acre feet, that's still 700,000 acre feet. So the idea is to optimize the use of that water. You capture it, you spread it around, just like Tina was talking about. The state's first real project is to build a series of berms around the new river, capture that water, spread it out. And we can expand that, doing a lot more shallow, cheaper berms. Again, spreading the water out on the landscape, which prevents dust. And we know back in 2006 to 2010, the Bureau of Reclamation and USGS built a 100-acre pilot project that did that, and had more than 200 different species of birds there in a very small area with listed desert pupfish in there. So we know it works. You capture the water, you spread it out, and then you're going to have a very different Salton Sea. And ultimately what's going to look like is like down in South San Diego Bay, you have a series of salt ponds. So think of those as a variety of different salt gradients, which will provide habitat for different species or different guilds of birds. And then in the center, you would have a brine sink. So you would have water flow through there, you prevent some water quality problems that way. The middle becomes essentially an inert body of water, but collects all the salt, because the biggest challenge with some of these plans to import water from other places is what do you do with the salt?
Yeah.
And it's 4 million tons per year of salt flowing in. So there's more than 450 million tons of salt in the Salton Sea. Where do you put it? Right, to desalinate that water, which some people talk about, you're talking about, I think I measured this once, it was like 6 square miles of salt a yard deep every year. It's again, scale at the Salton Sea is hard to grapple with, but the amount of salt that you would have to deal with is staggering. So to my mind, the natural solution here is let gravity take that salt down, you have an inert brine pool at the bottom, capture the water on the edges, you have good habitat, and you suppress dust on the edges, and then you're going to have to do more of the projects that IID is doing with dust suppression in the dry areas.
So one of the challenges, you can't mitigate a water transfer with water, or else you've just canceled
Yeah.
everything out. So it is going to be crucial for a lot of these air quality projects to find dust solutions that are waterless. So there's a lot of innovative going on. Our staff is responsible for implementing some dust mitigation projects. We're taking farm technology. We're tilling the field. We're chunking up that soil where it's conducive to these types of projects, interrupting the airflow and letting those sediments drop out. On the areas that don't have water, there's a lot of sand dunes to the west, which are frankly one of the biggest contributors to the air quality problems in Imperial Valley. But as that playa recedes and as you have all this exposed shoreline, that's sandpaper, and it's just scouring that playa. So we've sunk some wells. We're trying to see if we can get some of that saline groundwater, and we collect seeds from the native habitat. The state has also put a lot of hay bales out there, which is interesting, but to the extent that it holds down the dust so that those communities aren't further at risk, that's really our goal, is preventing these problems.
Well, let's go back to the deal. So the deal had this massive transfer, and part of it was a big payment that you began making to the San Diego began making to the Imperial Irrigation District. The makers of the deal thought that it would create a whole market of water transfers like this, that other people would see how that worked, would figure out other ways that farms could conserve and urban areas could buy it. And the San Diego in particular thought that would trigger a new market for water in a way. It actually didn't. Why do you think that is, Dan?
This transfer is so unique. It's one of a kind, both in terms of the scale of it, 200,000 acre feet per year. I think if you go back to 95, I mean, the original MOU for the transfer was 500,000 acre feet worth of water. It eventually got down to 300 before we went to the State Water Board, and of course now it's at 2.
Can we put that in perspective? How much is 200,000 acre feet of water?
It's enough for roughly the city of San Diego, I would say. Yeah, it's quite a bit of water. You know, in terms of the total water that the Water Authority gets from the transfer, the 200 plus the 277.7, it's very close to what the Southern Nevada Water Authority uses, their allotment of Colorado River water, so not insignificant at all. But back to the water transfer market, I mean, I still am hopeful that we can get there. I think being able to use our resources, being able to use Metropolitan's distribution system, and distribution systems, quite frankly, up and down the state of California, in Arizona, Nevada. I mean, Lake Mead really is and should be the clearinghouse for water transfers. Water for the Environment has been very successful. Michael could probably speak to that all day. But, you know, I think if we get there, we have the ability to move our resources and develop some flexibility. I mean, we've been at this 200,000 acre foot transfer for 20 years now. This was something that we had in mind back in 2003. Same thing with the exchange agreement with Metropolitan. If we have the ability to create some flexibility and offload some of that water or transfer it to another party, while still retaining the rights to Imperial Metropolitan's rights, I think that's a benefit for all of California.
Let's talk about that for a second. So A lot of this is the origin, not all of it, obviously there's multiple origin stories, I think, of this deal, but a lot of it does come from the kind of panic that this region experienced in the mid-90s when there was a drought, and Metropolitan threatened and executed some restrictions on water and threatened much more during that period. And it's almost like San Diego collectively realized how precarious our position at the end of this pipe or canal really was. And everything since then, this transfer, the investment in desal, the investment in local storage, the discussion going forward, all these costs that ratepayers in San Diego have incurred are all about sort of dealing with that panic and changing the dynamics so we don't feel so vulnerable in those moments. But it has just collectively added a tremendous amount of cost to ratepayers and to the community. But it also had with it a very tense relationship, particularly between Metropolitan.
What are you talking about?
No, it was all good. Yeah. Yeah. The first 10, 15 years of my water watching career was about mitigating or dealing with the fight between, in particular, these two agencies. So to have you both up here fist bumping is pretty rad. But so tell me, what happened to that relationship? All of you described when we talked earlier that you went from adversaries to partners because of this deal. But in particular, these two agencies, the Metropolitan Water District and the San Diego County Water Authority, are now in a state of partnership that kind of boggles my mind. What happened since the panic of the mid-90s to now that this fist bump is even possible?
You know, Adele, I think it's the realization of our two agencies having to work together at, of course, a staff level. I think that at a staff level, we have always been on the same page. San Diego County Water Authority, Metropolitan staff-wise. Broader politics, I think, got us sideways in some form. And of course, there's a financial component to all of this, right? I mean, you don't just initiate litigation just, to destroy reputations and whatnot. Well, some might, but that wasn't the intent of it all. So I do think that in hard times, you've got to find a way to come together. And I think that that's what we've done, at least in the past couple of years.
Sure. I mean, when I came to Metropolitan, one of the things I wanted to do is we can't move forward. I mean, what makes Metropolitan great is it's a co-op. It's about the 26 member agencies and how we work together and collaborate. And what what happened in 1990, I can't, speak to what happened then. But we just went through, I think Michael talked about last year when we had 6 million people in the western part of our region suffering almost the same, that they had zero allocation from the state water project. We couldn't get them water from the Colorado River, but then the Colorado River was shrinking. Diamond Valley Lake, which was amazing investments in resiliency, was shrinking. We couldn't get water to them, and they had to cut 40% of their water use, right? And to me, what that...
Hold on, what areas are we talking about?
It's Las Virgenes, Callejas, LA, Upper San Gabriel, Three Valleys, and a few others.
How bad would it have gotten if the rains hadn't come?
Would have been really bad because in April last year, we're projecting that we were not going to have enough water for everyone because we had zero allocation. And then we were talking about going back to the same allocation across the entire service area. But people were able to reduce by 40%. They were not happy about it. And that, for us, opened the door for us to start thinking, all right, how can we build the future resiliency as a co-op, as a metropolitan? That's what we're doing. The climate adaptation master planning effort underway right now is about looking for how we're going to build the infrastructure of the future, how we're going to build the storage of the future, how we're going to build the local water supply conservation that we're going to need to do. We've done a great work. 40% of the water, has been reduced because of conservation. 40%, almost half the water we import from Colorado River is because of conservation. But right now, we're looking at how we pay for it too, in a fair way. So what San Diego has done and what Dan just talked about, it's going to be part of the discussion on the business model. If somebody has surplus water in our member agencies because they created more water, can that be part of the regional solution? That can we move to somebody like Callejas, Las Virgenes, that needs the water when they need it? Can we build the infrastructure to move water back and forth to deal with the climate whiplash when we have dry conditions, we can move it from storage different parts of the system. But when we have a lot of water like we're having right now, can we move the water and store it everywhere in the system? And the infrastructure right now is limiting. We need to have infrastructure connecting San Diego with Orange County. Can we build the system to do that? All these things are on the table at Metropolitan, and I think we learned a lot from the 1990s and learned a lot of, I think the QSA actually helped us think in a collaborative way how we're going to work together.
So Scott, bringing it back to your question about the water transfer market, right? That's essentially what Adel is describing, and I think that what we embarked upon in the 90s and those cutbacks on the verge of 50% in the San Diego region, that is in fact what Adel and the Met service area were facing. So fast forward 20 years, maybe now is the time for that way of thinking, the water transfer sort of market-based approach to water.
But we have to clarify, we're not just cutting our order and having Met divert the water. We are actively conserving that water on efficiency-based conservation. We're investing in canal linings, in reservoirs, in changing the way we order water for the last 100 years and allowing our farmers to have funding so they can convert from flood irrigation to drip to linear move to sprinkler systems, to continue to have that productive farm ground that our economy is based off of. Our economy in Imperial Valley is very different, and we don't have another water supply. So I appreciate all these big infrastructure projects, but we have one canal that goes 82 miles to the Colorado River, and if you take that away, we're all going to be moving up here. Mm-hmm. If we can afford to, because that's our reality, is we have to take that funding, which has been very beneficial, to allow our farmers to implement these technologies and to do good things. And then, you know, our sort of consequential effect is the Salton Sea. So the more we do to become more efficient and create these waters, and I'm not sure Imperial Valley is a big believer in water markets. We're a big believer in protecting our community and investing in our community, which has its own challenges.
Well, let me ask you about, so they're talking about transferring water and all this and the resiliency that San Diego had. They're talking about that because of the water that Imperial County gave up, transferred, sold. In fact, they're talking about the surplus water they could transfer because it's your water. It's not yours, but how does that make you feel? Like, oh, maybe we should have done that, or?
It is our community's water, and that's what we as a public agency really try to protect. But when you have as much water as we have and you have as few people, politically, you know, you have a huge target on your back. And so we view a lot of these conservation programs as defensive water transfers. We voted it down a couple times and weren't very popular. And every single board member that voted for this transfer was then unelected at the next election. That's the local consequences. It's very personal in Imperial Valley. We're all, if not related, connected through the last 100 years.
Right.
And so, you know, it's a local challenge to get these agreements to move forward. We acknowledge there's larger problems on the horizon with the river from climate change and from drought. And certainly since the Colorado River is our only water supply, we can't just sit back and do nothing. But this active conservation is hard. We're conserving 16% of our water supply on an annual basis, 500,000 acre feet. It's not just transfers to San Diego. We have 100,000 acre feet to Metropolitan. We have close to 100,000 acre feet to the Coachella area, which has other water supplies. And so it's really about protecting our community and our longer term interests and using that funding to invest in that long-term water supply reliability and farming and food security for the rest of the country. If you're eating lettuce in December, it's coming from Imperial Valley.
Let me ask you, this deal provides a tremendous amount of money to the Imperial Irrigation District and subsidizes a lot about what's going on, but I imagine that's a good and kind of uncomfortable thing sometimes. Is this a deal that Imperial Irrigation District would like to continue into perpetuity?
Well, we'll ask our board that in a few years. I think it's a challenge because we do have these consequential effects. Maybe other areas it's easier, but on a daily basis, our growers are out there, you know, trying to make less water work and still grow a crop to feed your families and their families. And it's a very integrated community. We have folks that have been there that their great-grandparents helped build the canals that brought the water to our community. And so we have this double-edged sword of trying to become more efficient and continue to grow more with less water and still sustain that longevity and that sort of rural community aspect. So it's a challenge.
To me, I mean, I know there's a whole interest is that Imperial is on their own. No, they're not. We're all together. California is together. And I think there is a whole partnership now. We all support farming. We all support farming and responsible farming. We all also support taking care of the community. I've seen what happens to communities when you take their livelihood away. Behind every farm, there's a lot of people, working. And so I think what you see in the Colorado River Board, I know the chair is here of the board, we're all working together as California. And I want to say is, by us conserving water in Southern California, we were able to put 20 feet of water in Lake Mead to help. Right now, we're using less water than before. When we get the state water project water for us, we can actually put more water in Lake Mead to help people like, Imperial, the same way. But when we create recycled water locally in our region, that's going to help the entire watershed on the Colorado River. So there's nobody alone. And I think this is this old school of if you're winning, I'm losing. That doesn't work. We all have to be this together. I mean, if we do this together, the Salton Sea will be great. Communities in the Imperial Irrigation will survive and thrive. San Diego will thrive, and people, this is the future, and we can't do it alone. We all have to be in this together, collaborating. And I want to expand this beyond just California. I know there's partners here on the Colorado River. I know Brenda's here and others. It's about the entire watershed in the Colorado River and the country of Mexico and the tribes. I think we can do this together without leaving people behind. And that's what I feel.
Let me, Michael, finish that point, but I don't want to forget my thought for Tina, too. Go ahead.
So I just want to point out the underlying theme here, which is that there's been a dramatic shift over the past 20 years. 20 years ago, they were all thinking about, we need more supply. We've got growing populations, we've got growing economies, we need more water. And San Diego was reaching out to increase its water supply at the expense of IID. Metropolitan was looking around and was entering into a number of deals to get additional supply. But what we've seen is that demand has decreased dramatically. So I think last year your board chair said 40% decline in 30 years in San Diego County Water Authority. Something similar in Metropolitan as well. San Diego, 1990, I think or maybe it was in 2000, the annual report projected that a couple of years ago, your water supply, your demand was going to increase from something like 500,000 acre feet to almost 800,000 acre feet. This year, it's 440,000 acre feet. There's been a 28% decline in water demand in your service area, which is thanks to you guys for using less water. So there's been this portfolio approach towards water supply, which is now thinking about a range of different solutions, and conservation is key in that. Because if your service areas, if you people hadn't been decreasing your demand, there would have been dramatic cuts, massive rationing throughout the service area.
I think that comes up a lot. People are like, well, we can't add more housing because we don't have the water for it. We have added so much population, so much housing, and used less water in that period since then. But Tina, I'm not going to let you away from this real quick. You said it would be up to your board to decide whether to continue this sort of transfer and sale. What would keep your board from being thrown off if they make another deal like that? What are they worried about? What are the politics there?
Well, I think politics are one thing. I have to say, and I do appreciate Adele and Michael's comments, I think we had a tenuous start. I mean, the whole San Diego transfer deal started with a bunch of people coming down and buying land in IID, and they were going to steal the water, and then it sort of worked its way into a partnership.
With guns, or?
No, by fallowing land and allowing it to be left unused and available for other users. But that didn't work well. Turns out their attorneys weren't that great. But I think to the extent that we rural areas see the conservation efforts in the urban areas, and we see the sacrifices being made, we see the lower per capita water uses, that makes it easier for us to go work with our farmers and help them conserve water, because we see that we're not sort of taking one for the team so that other folks can have really nice lawns and swimming pools and sort of the accoutrements that we don't necessarily have in our community. So the more we're sort of all in this together, and frankly, droughts forge relationships with folks because you have to come to the table and you have to put aside whatever your biases are and whatever your previous perspectives were, because you have to get deals done. We've done a lot of partnerships with Metropolitan on storage over the years and continued to work with San Diego. And now we have new crises that we're facing on the river. And how do we make that work and make sure that while there are beneficiaries, there aren't losers to the deal? And I think that's what we've done the last 20 years.
So Dan, we did this transfer. We did the desalination. We've added so much infrastructure, so much capacity, so much water. And I know that that's come at a tremendous cost to our ratepayers that we're all dealing with. And one of the answers to that question that you've introduced is we could get investment now because of what we've built here. Maybe other entities would want to invest in our desal plant. Maybe other entities would want to invest in our connection through IID that we've made to the Colorado River, and maybe alleviate some of that. Is that real? Is that something that ratepayers could hope for?
I think it is. I mean, I think that has to be the future. I think that it's a tool that we all possess. It's just the willingness to make it happen, I think, in many ways. Again, I go back to the Met distribution system. That's infrastructure in place, moving water up and down Southern California. That on its face, that makes complete sense. Think about the high runoff years in the Eastern Sierras. We saw this in 2017. We saw it last year. If there's not a parking space for that water, any good water manager should be able to see that it should come down through Met's infrastructure to San Diego, and instead some of that Colorado River water is left in the river. Or perhaps it's used for farming in the valley, right? I mean, I think when you start thinking of things in that manner, more creative and flexible, I do think there's a future for it.
Let's end this with a discussion about the future. The next panel is how do we share the Colorado River, and a lot of you have talked about how the Quantification Settlement Agreement that we did here 20 years ago is a model that other states could use to make a bigger deal about the future of the Colorado River, because the crisis at the Colorado River is all of this assumes a level of an amount of water from the Colorado River that we cannot, with a straight face, say will come from the Colorado River. Fair, right? We all assume or are built to assume that there's more water from the Colorado River than there will be, especially if climate change wreaks the havoc that we worry about. So I'll start with Michael and come around. Is there a way to use what happened here 20 years ago to talk about the whole basin, the Colorado River Basin?
Well, so this year, IID has proposed an additional conservation of 250,000 acre feet as part of this effort to shore up critical elevations at Lake Mead. So for the next couple of years, that deal is still on the table waiting for federal funding to come through to make that happen. So there's some steps that could be taken, but as Tina mentioned, there's already been 16% cuts in the district. So how that's going to occur, I think is something that the board is grappling with. And at the Salton Sea, we're wondering what those impacts are going to be. So that was part of this new $250 million federal investment, contingent on these additional reductions. So the good news is that we're seeing additional federal interest in the Salton Sea, which I think is critical to moving these additional reductions forward, because absent that, again, the people north and south of the sea feel those impacts most directly. So getting that federal investment, we've laid out some ways that you can address the problems at the Salton Sea, build really good habitat there. So I think that's a good foundation to move forward. But we need to think about what those impacts are going to be. And really, one of the sticking points at the Salton Sea has been how you're going to maintain that. What's the operations and maintenance funding going forward? So there's funding for capital projects, but the state is still grappling with how to maintain those projects in the future. So that potentially is a federal funding source or some other funding source can make that happen. But we're seeing some progress, and I think there's opportunities there, whether it's at the scale of the reductions needed on the Colorado River.
Yeah.
Remains to be seen.
This is probably something that we all need to learn from, and every state needs to figure out how to quantify and create this partnership between ag and urban. We share a lot with the urban communities, and what we've done is actually entered into an MOU with all of the urban communities in the Colorado watershed to use water efficiently. And I said that publicly one time I was down in Santa Fe, I said, doesn't give anybody the right to waste water, even if you had the rights for that water, right? Nobody should waste it. And in Metropolitan, we've done amazing work in investing, billions in investing in conservation. We just partnered with NRDC and Heal the Bay to co-sponsor a bill, AB 1572, Laura Friedman's bill about non-functional turf, and it's at the governor's desk to sign. Potentially in metropolitan service area, if we replace non-functional turf that only the person mowing it is using it, it can save 300,000 acre-feet of water that we can store and help everyone. That partnership happens. We're building the largest recycled water project in the country at Pure Water Southern California, and we're looking at partnering with LA to make it even double that, to 300 million gallons, 300,000 acre-feet a year. But also, the partnership has to go beyond just our local area. That's why we are on the project on Pure Water SoCal. We're partnering with Arizona and Nevada on how we do it together. In the future, as we negotiate, look at post-2026, we negotiate cuts. And I'm gonna keep saying, it's not just cuts, it's about solutions. We can't just keep cutting. It's about what are the solutions to create partnerships across the watershed. And I want to use a term that I want to keep challenging, and I just used it the other day. We talk about our reservoirs of water to store water. I'm going to challenge that the federal money would run away soon. We're not going to be able to get more money. This is a lifeline that we got. But I would say, can we create a reservoir of money? A reservoir of money where the 40 million people across the Colorado River watershed with the country of Mexico can contribute to a reservoir of funding. We all agree that now we find ways how we invest across the entire watershed to make us sustainable. Everyone, ag, urban, environment, and tribes. So we need to think differently. We need to take the blinders off. This thing about me versus you cannot work anymore. You see that happening. You know, you saw the news, the 6 states versus California. And I was like, we're not gonna jeopardize the priority system, but we can work with it and work around it. So that's the collaboration we're doing. And I think we need to do it because time is not on our side. I'll tell you a few years from now, you're gonna say, we need to do something more. And I think it's on us. All of us, ratepayers, environmentalists, community, business, water leaders, legislators, we all have to come together and get it done.
Thank you. Couple last
So
thoughts?
I'm glad we're recording this and we have these partnerships that will continue into the future because it is going to be
Yeah.
tough. When Adel talked about 300,000 acre-feet of savings that can be made, that's 60,000 acres of lettuce, of cantaloupes, of onions, of crops that fill your refrigerators and, you know, healthy food supplies. I think we have a grower that says, I don't grow hot Cheetos. Well, we want to make sure that we continue to provide those supplies to the nation. We also want to make sure that we're not fallowing a farm so that other folks can have a really green lawn. And we're going to face some of these tough challenges moving ahead. It's good we're at a point in the partnerships where they're mutual and not one-sided, because I think they sort of started off that way, but we really have grown, I think, as agencies, and the long-term relationships between staff and management and our elected officials that have created hopefully some new opportunities moving forward, because it's not going to get any easier from a water supply standpoint, and we are going to be more dependent on one another.
You have 22 seconds.
Okay,
I'm kidding.
I'll be quick. I think what I inherited at the Water Authority, I've been there 20 years. I've seen how the sausage is made, right? The relationships that I have up here on the stage have been great, and I know they're going to continue. I need to be able to get the Water Authority or help the Water Authority evolve, continue to evolve. The transfer agreement, the canal lining projects, the Salton Sea agreements that we have, you would think that they're static, that there are 2003 agreements that are only relevant in 2003. There's incredible flexibility within those agreements that we can all work on together to bring this to the next level. And I think that's kind of going to be my focus going forward.
Well, folks, do me a favor, and when you drive on the 8 through the desert, you'll see the All-American Canal, and you'll see that it's concrete lined. That's a result of this deal. When you fly over and come into San Diego, you'll see the Salton Sea, you'll see the green part, and then you'll see the desert part right next to it. This is all part of that same system, and it's all being affected by this deal. and being and the whole Colorado River Basin is depending on some sort of similar situation. So thank you to everybody who came up. Let's give them a hand for getting together on this. Thank you. Stay tuned for the next panel. And Andrea, you got something?
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Great job. Wow, this is why we keep you.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us. The next session in this room is the Colorado River, How Will States Learn to Share? That starts at 11:15, so you have a couple minutes if you want to join that one.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Yeah.